Welcome everybody, first of all, to our informational webinar on the third derivative accelerator. We're gonna have a few polls going out to get to know you all better along the way with some basic information. Would also invite you to submit questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. No need to wait until the end. Feel free to send them throughout the presentation, and our team will either answer them in the chat directly or at the end we'll surface them in the verbal Q&A. And there will be a recording of this afterwards if you'd like to review it, or if you have a team member that can't join, that you can access on our registration page. So again, thank you for registering and taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us. Most of you on the call are leaders at an early stage startup, so we're especially grateful that you're interested in our program and are carving out some time for this. The goal of today is to provide you with information about third derivative and our program, and of course give you a chance to ask any questions that you have about us. If you have come from a startup that fits with our mission and requirements, we would love to have you apply before our deadline for the next cohort of October 27th. So that's approaching soon. I'll be one of your hosts today. My name is Jamie Hankins. I serve as the startup portfolio manager, overseeing all of the account managers for our portfolio, as well as how we deliver impactful programming, mentorship, and other resources to our companies that are selected. I'm joined by my colleague Raivat from our research team, who works on a lot of our startup diligence, investment theses, and other technical reviews. So you'll be hearing more from him shortly, and he's a great resource for questions about our selection process, given that he's very hands-on in that review. Next slide, please. So we have a pretty simple agenda today. We're going to give you a little bit of history into third derivative and our theory of change. We'll walk you through some valuable information you will need to know for our selection process, and some insight into the different types of cohorts that third derivative has in our program. We'll then tell you about what the program looks like for the startups that are selected and the resources that are available. And finally, we'll open it up to the floor and have time to dive into the specific questions you have on your mind in Q&A format. So keep those coming in along the way. From there, let's jump right in. We go one more slide. So to give you a bit of history into third derivative as an organization, in 2019 and up to early 2020, our colleagues at RMI recognized that in order to bend the emissions curves from any crucial emitting categories and the hard to abate sectors, the pace at which we need solutions to be developed and deployed needed to be a lot faster. And around that same time, the International Energy Agency showed that nearly half of the technologies that we needed to get to net zero in energy and energy allied sectors we're still in the early TRL, tech readiness level development phase. And many of the solutions that currently worked and were commercial were not yet economical compared to other alternatives and still had that green premium associated with them. So we needed solutions that, in addition, that directly draw down and sequester carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, because even by IPCC estimates, we're likely to need that to get to net zero emissions, and then we're still going to need gigatons of carbon removal afterward to get to atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations back to manageable levels. So as many of you know, these technologies have been relatively hard to commercialize for a variety of reasons. And until quite recently, it's been hard for them to attract venture investments and support, and there's still a lot of difficulties in that space. There are many reasons for all of this. Often the capital intensity for these solutions is very large. For new battery chemistries, for example, it can take an estimated $2 billion to reach full commercialization and deployment. The development cycles for technologies in this space can be really long, which doesn't always suit well to typical Silicon Valley venture capital models. And in fact, hard tech startups on average take about 9 years for an exit. So that requires the venture model itself to change, or even other types of investments to be incorporated. And often it's very difficult to reach the customers for climate tech startups, given that there are large incumbents at play, highly regulated markets, and it's hard for new entrants to just come in and meet the customers. So for the audience here, I'm sure I'm not sharing anything you aren't already aware of, but because of these reasons, we built Third Derivative as a new model for climate tech commercialization, where we bring together an entire ecosystem of players in a collaborative approach to adjust them. Next slide. So ultimately, Third Derivative is built to find, fund, and help massively scale impactful climate tech innovations. Our ecosystem approach brings together various stakeholders needed to help startups address multiple commercialization and scaling barriers. So those stakeholders are corporates, climate-focused venture capital funds and other investors, technical and venture building experts in our mentor community, RMI's in-house experts across the organization, and more. And the way we do this is by leveraging RMI's incredible techno-economic and regulatory knowledge. And for those who aren't familiar, RMI is an independent nonprofit founded over 40 years ago as a think and do tank focused on energy transition. And today has about 700 techno-economic analysts, market and policy experts all over the globe. So we're also leveraging that network of corporations, governments, investors, philanthropists, and other nonprofits, all the stakeholders needed to be brought into the D3 ecosystem to help startups across all of the different emissions categories that we're working with commercialize and scale up faster. Next slide. And we're launching a poll as well, if you could take a moment to answer there. So while we launched in December 2020 officially, so ourselves, we're less than 3 years old, and in many ways that puts us in our own startup mode. We've grown extremely quickly on our path so far. First off, with lots of startup applications globally, we've received more than 2,300 internationally since our launch. And the 159 startups in our portfolio today across 8 different cohorts puts us at a less than 7% acceptance rate. So a highly selective group around you for the startups in the portfolio. That are getting rigorously vetted and bringing in massive cohorts that are all high quality with significant climate impact potential across greenhouse gas emissions categories, especially in harder to abate sectors. That's led to some VC partners describing us as the best climate tech deal flow that they've seen. And many VCs that are not official partner of ours, take advantage of our ecosystem directly to take part in our deal flow newsletter and get access to startups as well. With that, we're helping to propel more funding and deals to our startups very quickly. And we've reached over 1.1 billion of capital raised by our startups. And in addition to that funding, we've facilitated a lot of corporate introductions that has led to deals and pilots with many more in discussion at this stage. Next slide. Next slide, Kirsty. Well, I'll get started as that's coming up. There we go. Looks like it jumped ahead just a little bit. One more back, please. Sorry about that. Cool, perfect. So this is what our portfolio looks like today, or at least most of it, because these logos keep getting smaller and smaller as our portfolio is growing so quickly. And you can see all of these on our portfolio page of our website as well and learn a little bit more about what each of them are working on. In our selection process, we're looking top down at where the emissions are coming from across the globe and actively looking for startups that can solve the most difficult challenges and address the biggest sources. And because of that approach, our portfolio is actually roughly mapped to where the major emissions categories are. And at least for me, this is one of the best representations of why D3's community exists. We're supporting a lot of companies in industrial decarbonization, new approaches in the built environment, electricity generation, transportation, and other areas that are at least historically have been underserved and underinvested in, even within the climate space, despite the fact that these are the categories where our most dire needs lay to address climate change. So, all of this to say that you would be joining some amazing peers across North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. We're in about 20 countries. We're spanning about 20 countries of headquarters across the portfolio today that are working on similar adjacent problems to you. And we offer a platform for you to connect and share that experience together. So for this next part, I'll pass it along to Revat to introduce himself further and talk to you about our selection process.
Thanks, Jamie. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Revat. I lead our industry sector research and due diligence here at Third Derivative, and going to give you a quick overview of our selection process, how we kind of evaluate startups and some minimums for our program. And yeah, let's get into it. Next slide, please. So D3's advantage is pretty simple. We are the best networked climate tech accelerator on the planet. The best way to think about us is as a resource for you as founders to be leveraged at your discretion. Our network includes, as Jamie mentioned, 159 startups, elite climate tech startups across all major emission sectors, over 175 expert mentors in our network, as well as over 800 energy policy and acceleration experts from our founding partners, RMI and New Energy Nexus. We also have 12 global corporate partners, including some large ones you see on the screen there, and 19 international VC partners with over $7 billion in assets under management. Next slide, please. So there are some minimums, and maybe I'll just get those minimums out of the way first. We have a climate impact potential screening that I'll get into in a little bit more detail on the next slide. And my colleague Amy also posted an article describing how we actually calculate climate impact for different solutions. We currently take startups that are at least a TRL4. So what this means is some sort of lab scale demonstration of a complete system. So if you're a green ammonia startup, a lab scale demonstration of generating green ammonia would be the earliest at which you could apply to our accelerator. We also require a minimum of 2 full-time employees. And for any software-based solutions, the software solution has to have generated revenue before it can be considered for our program. So in terms of the overall selection process, the first thing we look at is our climate impact. And I'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. Then we look at the technical and economic perspectives of the startup, starting from a techno-economic analysis, looking at the customer value proposition and the competitive landscape, and then exploring pathways to scale and seeing how reasonable those are for that particular technology stream. And then our second part of our diligence is more ecosystem focused, and we involve our partners not only to make sure that there's a good connection between partner interest and the startups we're taking, but also that we have the right tools to actually support the startup throughout our 18-month accelerator program. Next slide. So this is a little more detail on how we actually go about calculating our climate impact potential for different types of startups. We separate them into 3 different categories, either a direct mitigation measure, a critical systems enabler, or a diffusion enhancing enabler. And these are just separated based on these metrics you see on the screen. And we have certain minimum requirements for the potential climate abatement. So when it says like at least 0.25 gigatons CO2 for global solutions, an example of a direct mitigation measure which meets that would be water electrolysis for hydrogen generation. Critical systems enablers are things like long duration energy storage, which are essential to make renewable energy generation solutions feasible for grid-wide deployment. And then software and other things that allow or break down some of the barriers to market penetration are in our final category of diffusion enhancing enablers. Next slide. So in terms of how we actually accelerate, it's a very bespoke program. Something that we've kind of taken back from startup CEOs and CEOs specifically who have gone through different programs is that they often find themselves spending more time on the program than they are on their actual solution. And that's really just not helpful in most situations. So we're a very bespoke program. We meet startups where they are. We do a needs assessment, and then we make a tailor-made plan. And it's very low touch. Fully remote global program with an average commitment of about 2 hours a week, sorry. So we really only ask you for what you need, and then throughout our network of connections, we try and address those needs as effectively as possible. We're very commercial and deal focused. We provide curated intros and facilitated deal making with our VCs and corporate partners. And we're very ecosystem driven, hoping to create a peer-to-peer community-led programming type environment where our startups can learn from each other. We also put on events like our peer-to-peer networking events for our CEOs, where we get a bunch of our startup CEOs in a room and have a discussion topic, and provides a really unique opportunity for CEOs across various different industries and different verticals of startups to learn from each other. Lastly, there's no cost associated with this program. We are fully taking in startups who are in other accelerators, assuming those other accelerators allow startups to join simultaneously. No fees to participate, and there is an optional $100,000 convertible note upon acceptance, fully optional. Currently not able to offer this in India, but it is something we're working on. It's just a challenge with the regulatory landscape right there as of now. Next slide, please. So I spoke a little bit about our general cohort right there. We have done a couple focus cohorts, and while that's not the focus of this application cycle, I just wanted to briefly mention some of our work there. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of different technology verticals in the climate space that require very tailored resources, such as CDR, e-fuels, things like that, that require a different set of resources than the general climate space when scaling early stage startups. And that's something we are trying to increase our influence in terms of going below that TRL4 threshold. And if we can go to the next slide now. Our first example of going below that threshold was our first Gigaton Capture program, which is a focus cohort tailored towards CDR solutions. Really, all the resources provided to this cohort were tailored towards bringing that cost of capture below $100 per ton to achieve gigaton scale capture in time for climate horizons. Next slide. Another example of a focus cohort we've done more recently is our Clean Mobile Power Initiative. This is a initiative funded by Netflix and the Walt Disney Company, where we are trying to decarbonize production. While this may seem like a very small emission sector, and it is, it's only about 700 kilotons, we believe that the premise of clean mobile power has much wider ranging applications across the emission sectors, such as construction and more general clean mobile power solutions. And as we move to a more distributed grid, these are going to become more and more important. So we are focused on decarbonizing diesel gensets effectively with this cohort, which are a massive emission sector across the world, across various different verticals. So this is a quick peek into our focus cohort program and some of the work we're doing there. And as we come out with new initiatives in this space, you will be sure to hear about it on all of our socials. And with that, I will hand it back to Jamie.
Awesome. Thanks, Ravat. Just saw a question here of, will we be sharing the slides? Yeah, we'll have a recording up on the registration link for the page, and you can view everything there. But diving next into like a little bit of more of an overview of the Accelerator program, and we can go to the next slide. We've mentioned a few times that this is a fully remote program that allows it to be accessible across the globe, which you saw reflected in our portfolio of startups coming from nearly 20 countries across 5 continents today. And when we're developing programming, we aim to take a really highly tailored approach because of that variety, understanding that even within the same market in the same sector, any individual startup's needs and what support they're looking for from an accelerator is going to vary. So we really think of Third Derivative as like a choose your own adventure experience where there are consistently a large menu of resources to take advantage of. I'll highlight what some of those are, all oriented around knowledge sharing, capital mobilization, and commercial deal making. But we have a very, very light touch approach in terms of program requirements. And to touch on that first, in fact, when you're participating in the program, there are only a few things that we notice from requirements. One is check-ins with Third Derivative staffs. So during onboarding, all startups are going to be assigned an account manager that's responsible for meeting with them on a regular cadence. These range from a 30-minute meeting monthly to quarterly, depending on the startups and what their needs are. We can always, if there's a very focused challenge that we're working on, we may meet a little bit more often as requested. And the purpose of those calls is to just talk through key updates and challenges and see what Third Derivative resources are available to support and help to mobilize those. Between those check-ins, we have an internal ecosystem platform where our startups can keep us updated, us and our partners updated on the latest focus areas, update their latest pitch deck if they're raising, which we can then share forward to our investor and corporate partners to hopefully produce a little bit of inbound interest in the business. And then lastly, each quarter we send out a survey, takes between 10 and 20 minutes to complete, and helps us understand how we're doing, gathers feedback, collects growth metrics around revenue, fundraising, et cetera, so that we can understand the overall health of the portfolio. And in terms of requirements, that's really it. We hope that this low time commitment allows our teams to really self-select for the options that are most important for their business. and over the course of the 18 months evolve what they're taking away from the from third derivative, along with the needs of what the team is facing. And to say a few more words about that, it gives participating teams a lot of flexibility. And, I think it's one of the core differentiators of third derivatives program versus some of the other accelerator and entrepreneur support programs out there, is that you can lean into programming that's more relevant and interesting to you. And you can even lean out for a few months of that 1.5-year program if you're highly focused on, a specific project deployment at that time. And we don't have an assigned mentor necessarily, or any other consistent programming that we're going to be bugging you to take advantage of at a time that might actually be a distraction from your main business. Next slide. Going deeper into what some of those options available are, we start with our investor and corporate support. So as Ravat mentioned, we have 12 global corporate partners spanning tech companies, oil and gas majors, finance companies, entertainment, telecommunications, energy providers, and more. We also have about 20 international venture capital funds in our partner network that invest from pre-seed into growth stage businesses. So together, these partners work really closely with us to help inform our selection process, as Ravat mentioned, and provide feedback on which of the businesses and technologies they might engage with if selected into the program. And with our VC partners, we have a lot of great examples of our partners leading or participating in funding rounds in our portfolio and becoming important parts of our startups' growth stories. A lot of this is true because our fundraising support often starts before our investor introductions take place. Our own team and our mentor community, we're regularly working with our founders to help develop their fundraising strategy, identify the right sources of capital, investor profiles, offer deck and pitch feedback, talk through, even how to think about valuations or board management, and then ultimately work together to develop an investor list and provide some outreach to really set our teams up for success with our own investor partners and our larger investor network. And that's resulted in a lot of success when we look at the fundraising funnel of investor outreach down to deep due diligence and even term sheet. And if we look at one partner of ours like Volo Earth, they've invested in 10 of our startups alone. And all of our partners are regularly meeting with teams to lead or follow on rounds or discuss what that might look like. Similarly, on the corporate side, we're always looking to make introductions where our corporate partners can explore pilot or commercial relationships with our startups, or just provide mentorship to our teams on their approach to business development, and maybe in some cases make direct equity investments if they have a CVC arm. We've seen Berkshire Hathaway Energy is one of our partners, has launched pilots with multiple portfolio companies that have resulted in really important proof points, helped expand into full commercial deployments that are important parts of the startup's journey, and is saving BHE and their subsidiaries millions of dollars annually as they continue to expand. Shell similarly has brought multiple teams into their Game Changer program after being introduced through Third Derivative. They've also launched several pilot projects, supported international expansion of our portfolio, and invested directly into a handful through their CVC. So we can talk a little bit more about other specific examples later, but we have some great examples of quality engagement between our startups and our investor and corporate partners. And part of the reason is because we have a partner activation team that meets with all of our partners on a regular basis, every month or two typically, to highlight interesting startups and be advocates for the portfolio to mobilize money on their behalf. And all of this doesn't include our much larger network of investors and corporates and other ecosystem players through RMI and other networks that we're plugged into that we're able to facilitate introductions to on behalf of our startups. Next slide. Beyond our direct partners, D3 has a healthy network of mentors that volunteer their time to support our teams. These folks might be entrepreneurs themselves, technical experts, corporate executives, or other leaders that bring in a wide variety of skills or sector expertise and global experience that we can take advantage of. Because we know that building a startup, even for a serial founder, is a massive undertaking and requires developing new skills and tackling new challenges that you likely won't have faced before at any given stage. And through our mentor community, we hope to connect you with experienced people that have, kind of been there, done that in the past, to provide feedback where it's needed, and ideally help our founders to avoid some of the common pitfalls of entrepreneurship along the way. Next slide. And lastly, the D3 program offers an array of other resources and programming on a regular basis throughout the program. And that, kind of falls into that menu of opportunities to take advantage of. On the calendar, on any given month, you might see peer-to-peer events focused on different sectors, or CEO peer-to-peers to, share some of the challenges of scaling a startup as a leader and managing a growing team. Opportunities for startups to showcase in front of our partners. We also are starting showcases to different RMI programs that are aligned with your sector. We very recently, just 2 weeks ago, ran a policy session covering the latest federal guidelines on the Inflation Reduction Act and how those might be relevant to what those different mechanisms are and how they might be relevant to our startups, and other group mentoring sessions and fireside chats and things of the sort. We've also steadily been introducing more and more in-person events as well. Next week, several members of our team will be at Verge Climate Conference in San Jose for the second time, along with 15 to 20 of our startups that will be attending with us. And we're also going to be hosting a side event to offer more intros and provide discount. And we provided discounts to all of the startups that were interested in attending. We did the same this year with multiple conferences across the US and Europe, Israel and India. And we'll be growing that and expanding into other regions in the future based on feedback from the portfolio of what conferences are the most interesting to them. In some cases, we've also gotten our team on stage as part of panels or within startup competitions. For instance, earlier this year, I was at Change Now in Paris, and one of our startups, Createra, flew in from Israel and ended up winning the buildings category with a pretty sizable platform in front of them of investors and corporates. So those are really excellent opportunities for startups that are looking to get themselves out there a little bit more. And finally, we're looking to build out a database of off-the-shelf digital resources and exclusive discounts to share with our portfolio and provide relevant knowledge. So that's, a lot of the basics. From here, we can go to the next slide. Want to hear, what lingering questions you all have about the program itself, about its involvement or any of our partners, or the selection process. So we can move over to Q&A. We'll start with a question on Revat. This one I'll hand over to you on what is the typical traction and milestones that you value in startups accepted into the program?
Yeah, great question. I think demonstrated proof in some capacity, like we mentioned, either a full lab scale system demonstration, or if you've run like an early pilot, have any kind of third-party testing. If it's a hard to abate technology, I think third-party testing is probably one of the most important things we look at. But then beyond that are just our general requirements in terms of being impactful based on a climate impact assessment. And then we have the minimum number of employee requirements. Also, just while I'm on air, I will answer Peter's question about forest conservation and forest restoration. AFLU in general is a sector we do take applications from. So absolutely, we'd be happy to see applications in that sector. Thanks for the question, Peter.
Thanks, Robert. I've got a general one here on what we see as the key value proposition that Third Road offers to startups, and how it might differentiate from other programs. There's kind of three things that I might mention there. One is flexibility. 18 months is a long accelerator program versus the kind of standardized model that is followed by Y Combinator or Techstars, where they might be 3-month or 6-week sprints with a little bit more time commitment, but a shorter time period overall that culminates in this deal day. 18 months, we designed it as such because of a lot of the challenges that are very specific to climate tech startups and the long development cycles and regulatory markets that there are to navigate. Let alone the amount of time it takes to launch and see through a pilot. So we launched as a very long program with a lot of flexibility, as we mentioned. We have some startups that come in and they're really focused on fundraising at that time. And that's really where we're orienting our support. For others, they might have recently closed a round and they're really looking to deploy that capital in an effective pilot. And we're looking for pilot partners and people to help on the next stage of that growth from the corporate side. For each of those examples of startups, 9 months later, it might flip. And that first startup is looking to then deploy the capital that we ideally helped them raise, and vice versa. They may have deployed the capital and, a year into the program switch to focusing on fundraising. So I think that's a massive advantage compared to other programs, and is one of the reasons why we don't see ourselves as particularly competitive with other programs. Obviously, all of you have limited bandwidth as a startup leader, that you can spend overall on various programs, but we hope that the flexible nature of ours allows you to not necessarily have to pick and choose quite as much. Other advantages, I think, are RMI colleagues in the 700, technical experts, policy experts, market experts around the globe, are really terrific resources, and the history and the network that comes along with that is really powerful. We have RMI programs focused on carbon-free buildings, carbon-free electricity, transportation. We have geographic programs focused on global South or islands in particular. We have an India program. All of that is really valuable depending on what the startups are needing, and one of the ways that we help support startups all across the globe.
And then maybe I can just jump in here. There have been a few questions on the way we calculate our greenhouse gas impact. Amy posted an article where we go into quite a lot of detail on how we actually go about that and the rationale behind each of those emissions categories. And then there was a question about if the beachhead market has a lower impact, is that application still welcome? Of course it is. We're looking at the entire sectoral impact of that, right? So like if you look at something like green hydrogen, its total sectoral possible impact with full penetration is over 10 gigatons. The beachhead for a startup might be a fuel cell type technology, which has a much smaller impact. But it's really about, we want to be identifying the solutions that have the most potential to make the impact. And that's kind of how we calculate. So there's no specific formula we use. We look at the sectoral emissions and what can be abated with the solution. And that's how we kind of arrive at the climate impact number for a specific technology or startup.
Another question here from Roger, is the 100K convertible note the maximum investment for third derivative? And generally, if we could talk a little bit more about the VC network and funding round. So I'll take that first, the first part first. Yes, we have raised an SPV and are expanding it right now, actually. But the maximum deployment for any individual startup is that 100K convertible note, with pretty favorable terms. I believe that's actually on our website. But if not, reach out afterwards and we can share a draft of that. We also have flexibility for startups that are interested in our note, but might already have their own convertible note open or their own equity round open. We can apply the convertible note to that round, in order to make it as seamless as possible for both you and any investors that you're already working with. So we can do that pretty quickly and nimbly. So obviously, that 100 convertible note goes only so far in certain markets. And the majority of our fundraising support comes through our network. I already mentioned, for startups that are approaching a fundraise, especially if they haven't approached institutional venture capital investors or other profiles in the past, that's a different ballgame, and we can help develop that strategy, think about, governance terms, valuation, negotiation, the broader philosophy of how to develop a board and some of the things to keep in mind. And then we'll work together based on the geography, sector, and ticket size for that round to look through our network, and identify the investors that we can reach out to that is in scope for them. Often with our partners and, increasingly with our broader investor network, our team will even, if they're late due diligence and they might have a couple of questions, offer some of our team's knowledge in a meeting privately with that investor partner to share a little bit of feedback on why we selected that startup into the program and what our experience has been so far and why we're excited about the technology. As I said, we have about 20 venture capital partners. But on top of that, we have several hundred investors across the world that every month we put together a deal flow newsletter of startups that are raising capital with a little bit of information and a teaser or a deck to share out, and we send it to every that larger pool of investors to facilitate some inbound as well as our outreach. Piper, I'll grab your question as well, if it's possible to have a preview conversation with our team prior to the application. Unfortunately, not every cycle we receive about anywhere from 300 to 500 applications, and as you can imagine, we get a lot of requests for kind of informational calls. Definitely encourage you to send along any lingering questions that might not be answered today that you think of later to our team. But as much as we would love to do 300 to 500 of those individual calls, we simply don't have the bandwidth. So would love for you to apply, and then our team will begin reviewing on the 27th. And Ravat, maybe you can give a little bit of insight into the time frame for what that first round is going to look like.
Yeah. So our application windows are closing on the 27th, and then we will be reaching out to startups that make it through the initial review phase for a technical interview between November and December. And then the partner section, or round 2 of our diligence process, will take place after the new year. So in terms of when you can expect to be reached out to, if you're selected for an interview, you can expect to be reached out to sometime in early November. And I'll just answer a couple other questions here as well. Does selection in other cohorts count as traction? It's favorable for sure, but it does not substitute for the minimum requirements we have for our startups. Hopefully that's helpful. And let's see what else we have here.
There's a question here about do we have a specific formula for estimating greenhouse gas emissions impact? Ravat, I'd be curious for you.
Yeah, so I answered that a little bit earlier. We don't have a specific formula. We do have the article that we've published, which goes over how we kind of calculate our impact in quite a bit of detail. But just to reiterate, it's like if you're decarbonizing the steel sector, or if you have a piece that can decarbonize 80% of the steel sector, the simplest way to go about it is really just to look at the emissions of the steel sector, and then what is 80% of that? Does that meet our criteria? In this case, yes, it does, but that's just an example for an emissions category. So if you're trying to think about if your solution can meet that minimum, just try and think about what it can actually decarbonize and how much it can actually offset. And then that's basically how we do it. And we look at all the emissions across different sectors.
Excellent. Thanks, Ravat. Just scanning the list. Question of whether we only invest in hard tech companies or also software. We do invest in both. Our program was built really with both solutions in mind, and recognizing that historically, because of some of the specific risks and challenges, hard tech in particular has been underserved and underinvested in. And that's reflected. The majority of our portfolio is hard tech, though we do have some key system enablers on the software side that have a clear visibility because of the solution to what their greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential is. So both of those would be in focus. Champion, the question that both the founders are full-time employees, and does that count towards 2 FTEs? It absolutely does.
The application process, Andrew, just to answer how long it typically takes, that's a couple hours to 3 to 4 hours at most, is typically what we've heard from our startups which have applied. Piper, do you have scoring criteria that advantages diverse teams and founders? We don't have scoring criteria which advantages diverse teams and founders, and I want to use advantages very carefully here. We do value a diverse startup landscape, and we do try and balance our portfolio to evenly take in and allow people from all walks of life to be a part of our program. But there's no explicit advantage in so much as the definition of the word advantage.
when speaking to hard to abate sectors, does that mean your accelerator is not interested in consumer products that have clear environmental benefits for consumers? No, we also take in consumer products. The majority of our startups go to market is B2B, but we have consumer products already within the market. A lot of them are B2B to C, and those examples might be like a heat pump water heater, where they're working with installers, and but they're targeting residential consumers, and obviously will have an educational component to the consumer side too. That's just one specific example, but all to say, Jacques, that we are being consumer facing in no way precludes you from acceptance into our portfolio if we see a clear carbon emissions impact combined with a pathway to scale. Robot, you seen any other questions that we should grab live right now?
I mean, there was one on if a building sector startup is appropriate. Just want to reiterate, we take applications across industry, buildings, transportation, and the electricity sector. If you're in any of those sectors operating and your solution has the potential for a large climate impact, we are more than happy to have a look at your application.
A good question on what is your opinion about early stage companies addressing vast markets versus focused market segments. That's difficult to answer without diving into a little bit more of the specifics. I think there are clear advantages to a solution that has very broad applicability to a multitude of markets at an early stage. Eventually, focus is famously, one of the most important growth challenges of early stage startups. That's something that we work with a lot of our startups on. If the technology is applicable to a wide array of potential customers or geographies, how to focus and think about, roadmap and sustainable growth. So I think that, both of those can work. There's a lot of advantages to having a clear beachhead market that you're looking to focus on initially. But, I think that's also something that our ecosystem is well developed to support strategically. What's the process of selection from the first meeting to the end? Robert, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. We get obviously a bunch of startups into our system, and we do an initial what we call like a quick review of your application materials, pitch deck, etc. And then we make a down selection because, as Jamie said, we get anywhere from 400 to 600 startups, and it's just not feasible for us to conduct 400 to 600 interviews. So we down select to startups that we believe will meet our criteria. And then after that, we have our first meeting, which will be a technical interview with our startups. Sometimes there's a lot of back and forth, whether that's, possibly signing an NDA to dig in a little deeper into their IP, getting access to data rooms, et cetera, like that. And then we decide internally on the research team how many startups we'd like to pass through to our partner round. And then we have the partner round, which consists of a pitch day, which is typically a 5-minute pitch followed by a Q&A session to a panel of our partners, as well as possible expert mentors and people from RMI. And then we will conglomerate or take together the feedback from our partner session, as well as our technical diligence session, and make our final down selection for our cohort. So that's like a pretty high level overview of the steps from first meeting till you are offered a spot.
A few questions on, if the beachhead market is of a certain size, but there was future applicability to other sectors that ultimately are larger greenhouse gas emissions potential or abatement potential. Would that be in scope for our program? Yeah, it would. Like I said, we're going to take into account the technology itself. and the viable markets that it can apply to calculate the emissions impact potential. And that could ultimately be collaborative. It's helpful for us to see that this is the first market that we're focusing on, and we'll be thoughtful about expanding from there and into these other sectors. That can even be a pro. So I'd say if the overall impact potential is large enough, but you have a clear entry market that might be smaller, that's totally fine.
And I'll just answer Jordan DeVries' question. Does a climate impact assessment incorporate either both an LCA, a TEA, and/or environmental climate justice review? So we do look at LCAs during the climate impact assessment. If one's not provided, we look at a general LCA for the space that's typically developed in-house or from a peer-reviewed publication. TEAs are more considered in the technical review section because that's more determining, the long-term cost implications of your solution. And then environmental and climate justice review is something that is asked on the application in the form of co-benefits and the JEDI criteria. So that is taken into account. It is not currently it's not currently something that is measured on our rubric. But it is something that we value, and we are actively collecting data to kind of figure out the best way to incorporate that in future application cycles.
Excellent. I think we got the majority of the questions, all the questions that are of interest to the wider group. We'll give it a minute for any others to flow in, and Ravat and I will also be on the line for the next 10 minutes for anybody that would like to stick around. But for any that need to drop off, again, thank you so much. I hope this was informative, and really appreciate you taking the time and your interest in the program. As a reminder, all applications for this upcoming cycle are due October 27th. If that doesn't fit within your time frame, we'll have a next intake or selection cycle beginning in January, February, and several more throughout each year. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to the contact info on our webpage. And like I said, we'll be on for the next couple of minutes for anybody that has lingering questions, but thanks so much for joining. Mark, question that you submitted on fitting into multiple verticals. Can or should we join multiple cohorts? This intake for the upcoming cycle is for our general cohort. So that, can naturally span all of the different sector, the buildings, electricity, industry, and so on. The focus cohorts, I think, is what you are referring to, where when we launch a focus cohort, and so far we have one focused on CDR, and we're finishing up the selection process right now for our Clean Mobile Power initiative. If you were to join the general cohort, and then we launched a future focus cohort that was directly applicable to your technology, we have seen in each of our focus cohorts a few startups that have migrated actually from our general cohort over into our focus cohort. Really, the difference is that all of our focus cohort startups have all of the general resources available to them as well. It's more of an and situation where we're also coming in with some dedicated resource specific to their industry as well. So one application will suffice at the moment. We're only doing intake for our general cohort, but if there were an opportunity for a focus cohort in the future that was directly applicable, then we can consider that and have a conversation about it and move an application over.
And I'll just answer one of Venkata's questions on a carbon removal startup. It's a little specific, but some of it could be useful to the wider audience here. In terms of leveraging corporate support for establishing a pilot, those opportunities for funding support are definitely possible through our network. It's something that you would make aware to your startup support individual, which will be someone on our team who will be assigned to you once you join the program. And then we will go through our partner network and make the appropriate connections where possible. A board of advisors or mentors will only impact your selection process in a positive way. If you can build up more of a knowledge base on your side, and especially if your core team members don't have historical knowledge in the space, that can only be beneficial. So I don't see how that would negatively impact your application in any way. Well, we'll stay on for another 7-ish minutes for any further questions. So feel free to drop them in the chat.
Yeah, if you need clarification on anything we've answered or we might have missed you, feel free to bump that too. Well, I see no more coming in. So we can wrap up here. Again, we'll stay on the line for another couple of minutes, but one last thank you and appreciate you taking the time to join today.
I'm not sure if the chat will be savable, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, Emily or Amy, I'm not sure if you know there. I'm Peter, forgive me. I'm an amateur at webinar panelist hosting.
In terms of minimum requirements, they are generally kind of a hard stop. We do read the entire submission regardless, because, there have been a couple occasions where the company might be just on the cusp of one of our requirements and it may be worth some deeper consideration. But generally, we are pretty firm on our requirements, mainly from a perspective, apart from the climate impact perspective, mainly from a perspective of being able to service the startups to a high quality, which we've been doing, and we want to maintain that quality. And we're pretty careful about making sure that there's a good fit with our ecosystem to make sure that the startups also get the best out of it.
Jeff, while describing the technology and the application, how detailed should we get? As detailed as you are comfortable as you can get is only going to benefit you in the end. Ravat and the other members of our research team are a lot of expertise in the sectors that they're reviewing. And I think that's an advantage of our program is you're really talking to somebody that, understands the technology and the science and the language that you're speaking. If there's anything that you're not comfortable with, you can kind of note a little bit more broadly and maybe whether you're open to going deeper into the topic during the interview process. But yeah, we would definitely encourage you to get as specific as you're able to. And then Mark, do you want to bring a startup out of the garage to relocate near RMI? That's not a requirement. We launched in 2020 and didn't have an in-person gathering until about a year and a half ago. And we've steadily been introducing more opportunities for in-person gatherings and connection. But we do not have any sort of requirement that at least once during the 18 months of the program, like that you will have an in-person engagement because we want to be flexible to the realities of startups coming in from all over the world. Would we like to? We would love to see you at one of our events. There's no need to relocate specifically for the program. Our team itself, Revat and I are both based in Denver and Denver, Colorado, and RMI was originally built here. But at this point, RMI and our team is completely global. Our managing director and some of our staff are in Europe. We have folks in Asia, in India, and all across the US. So, there might even be a chance that somebody's already located near you. Now, if you saw strategic value in relocating and it happened to be close to an RMI office, we would love to support you there, but not something that we're communicating as a preference even for anybody in our portfolio.
And just for anyone left in the call, just wanted to echo what Amy just posted in the chat, that we will be posting all of the links that were shared in the chat along with the webinar recording, which will be up in about 24 to 48 hours at the original sign up link, which is also in the chat.
Excellent. Well, we only have 1 or 2 minutes left, so we can stop there. And hope you all have a great rest of your day and week. Bye all.